March 24, 2015. Germanwings Flight 9525 departs Barcelona with 150 people on board. 30 minutes later, the aircraft begins descending toward the French Alps without clearance, without explanation, without any distress call. Air traffic control tries to make contact. Silence. A military jet scrambles to intercept, but can only watch as the plane flies steadily toward the mountains. For 10 agonizing minutes, 150 people descend towards certain death, while someone in the cockpit has the power to save them all. But they won't. This isn't mechanical failure. This isn't pilot error. This is the story of how aviation's greatest security measure became its deadliest weakness. This is Inside Aero Disasters, and the day the cockpit door killed 150 people. Flight 9525 pushed back from Barcelona 26 minutes late. Routine European air traffic delays. An Airbus A320 with 150 people bound for Düsseldorf. Captain Patrick Sondenheimer, 34, had 6,000 flight hours and a decade of experience. First Officer Andreas Lubitz, 27, had joined Germanwings in 2013. Both were qualified, both were current, both had passed their medical examinations. But Lubitz was concealing critical information from his employer. 9 days before this flight, a doctor had prescribed him escitalopram, an antidepressant linked to suicidal thoughts in the first weeks of treatment. The same week, he had researched suicide methods online and studied cockpit door security systems. Germanwings knew none of this. Under German law, employers cannot access medical records. Pilots self-report fitness for duty. The system relies entirely on honesty. Lubitz had been declared unfit to fly by his physician, but he reported for duty anyway. He had torn up the sick note and hidden his condition from everyone at the airline. The takeoff was normal. The aircraft climbed to 38,000 feet, autopilot engaged, weather clear. At 10:30, French air traffic control confirmed their cruise altitude. 1 minute later, Captain Sondenheimer left the cockpit for a routine break. The door locked behind him, and Andreas Lubitz was alone with 149 people who had no idea what he was about to do. At 10:31, 1 minute after the captain left, Lubitz manually overrode the autopilot altitude setting. He programmed the aircraft to descend to 100 feet, virtually ground level. The A320 immediately began descending at 3,400 feet per minute. French air traffic control noticed the unauthorized descent and attempted radio contact. Lubitz did not respond. He had set the aircraft's transponder to 7700, the emergency squawk code, but transmitted no distress call. Captain Sondenheimer tried to re-enter the cockpit using the intercom system. Lubitz ignored him. The captain knocked on the reinforced door, then began pounding on it with increasing desperation. The cockpit doors had been strengthened after September 11th to prevent terrorist intrusion. They were designed to keep threats out, but they also kept help out. Lubitz's breathing remained steady and audible on the cockpit voice recorder. He was conscious, alert, and in complete control of the aircraft. This was not a medical emergency or loss of consciousness. During the previous flight from Düsseldorf to Barcelona that same morning, investigators later discovered that Lubitz had practiced this exact scenario, repeatedly setting the autopilot to 100 feet whenever the captain left the cockpit. This was premeditated. A French Mirage fighter jet scrambled from Orange Air Base to intercept the descending A320. The military pilot could see the aircraft but was powerless to intervene. There was no radio response, no indication of distress, just a commercial airliner flying steadily toward the mountains. For 8 minutes, 149 passengers and crew descended towards certain death while the person with the power to save them chose not to. The aircraft was 18 minutes from impact, and no one outside the cockpit knew why they were going to die. At 6,000 feet, Lubitz accelerated the aircraft's descent. He increased the speed setting multiple times, driving the A320 faster toward the ground. Captain Sondenheimer's attempts to break down the door became violent. The cockpit voice recorder captured the sound of metal objects striking the reinforced barrier. He was trying to use an axe from the emergency equipment. The passengers now understood something was catastrophically wrong. The steep descent was unmistakable. Screams filled the cabin as people realized they were going to crash. Lubitz made no radio transmissions, issued no warnings, provided no explanations. His breathing remained calm and controlled throughout the 8-minute descent. At 10:40, radar contact was lost at 6,175 feet. 1 minute later, the Airbus A320 struck the southern face of Tête du Trèvre Mountain at 700 kilometers per hour. The aircraft disintegrated on impact. The largest piece of wreckage was the size of a car. The debris field covered 2 square kilometers of remote alpine terrain. All 150 people on board were killed instantly. The crash site was so remote that it took helicopters hours to confirm there were no survivors. French gendarmerie and rescue teams found personal effects scattered across the mountainside. Phones, wallets, fragments of lives that had ended without warning. Among the dead were the 16 students from Haltern MC, returning from what should have been the trip of a lifetime. 2 teachers who had dedicated their careers to education, opera singers whose voices would never be heard again. But this wasn't a tragic accident. It was mass murder disguised as a plane crash, and the aviation industry was about to confront a threat it had never imagined: the pilot as the weapon. The investigation revealed the catastrophic failure of aviation's medical oversight system. Lubitz had been treated for depression and suicidal tendencies before becoming a commercial pilot. During his training, he was temporarily denied a U.S. pilot license due to psychological issues. Lufthansa knew about his mental health history, but cleared him to fly after psychiatric evaluation. What they didn't know was that his condition had returned. In the weeks before the crash, Lubitz consulted over 40 doctors, convinced he was going blind. His fear of losing his pilot's license drove him to desperate measures. Multiple physicians declared him unfit to work, but German medical privacy laws prevented them from contacting Germanwings. The system required Lubitz to self-report his unfitness. Instead, he destroyed the sick notes and continued flying. Investigators found evidence of his deteriorating mental state. Internet searches for ways to commit suicide and cockpit doors and their security provisions filled his browser history. He had been planning this for weeks. On the morning of the crash, Lubitz was prescribed escitalopram, an antidepressant that can increase suicidal thoughts during initial treatment. His toxicology report confirmed the presence of 3 psychiatric medications. The aviation industry faced an impossible paradox. The very security measures designed to protect aircraft after 9/11 had created an impenetrable barrier that prevented intervention when the threat came from inside the cockpit. Medical confidentiality laws meant to protect pilots' privacy had enabled a mentally unstable pilot to hide his condition and commit mass murder. Within days, European aviation authorities implemented emergency regulations requiring 2 people in the cockpit at all times. But the rule was quietly dropped by 2017 after airlines complained about operational costs. The fundamental problem remained unsolved. How do you protect passengers from the person flying the plane? Germanwings Flight 952. 5 crashed because aviation built perfect defenses against every threat except the one inside the cockpit. Medical privacy laws enabled a dangerous pilot to hide his condition. Reinforced doors meant to stop terrorists prevented the captain from saving his passengers. Self-reporting systems relied on honesty from someone who had none. 150 people died because human systems failed at every level. The regulations changed temporarily, then quietly reverted when costs outweighed safety. The uncomfortable truth: we still haven't solved how to protect passengers from the pilot flying the plane. This is Inside Aero Disasters. Subscribe to uncover the hidden failures aviation doesn't want to discuss, because the most dangerous threats are the ones we're not prepared for.